Have you ever made a choice so devastating that you wondered if God could ever use you again? I've been wrestling with this question lately, and it led me to someone whose story I thought I knew. But what I discovered in the darkness of a Philistine prison changed everything I believed about second chances. Because there's a moment in Samson's life that nobody talks about, a moment between his greatest failure and his final breath, that might just rewrite how you see your own broken story. If you're in a season right now where you feel like you've ruined everything, where the consequences of your choices have left you bound, broken, and wondering if your purpose died with your mistakes, I need you to stay with me, because what we're about to explore together isn't just ancient history. It's a truth that's been waiting in the darkness for anyone who believes their story is over. We're going to walk into a prison in Gaza. We're going to sit in the darkness with a man who had everything: divine calling, supernatural strength, a destiny that should have freed his people, and threw it all away. But what happens in that darkness, what God does in that final moment, might be exactly what you need to hear today. Let me tell you what they don't show you in the children's Bible stories about Samson. Before the strength, before the lion, before the legendary victories, there was a boy who grew up knowing he was different, marked from birth, set apart. A Nazirite dedicated to God, carrying a calling he never asked for, and a strength that made him feel invincible. But here's what I want you to feel. Imagine being given power you didn't earn. Imagine knowing you were supposed to save your people, but instead of humility, all you felt was entitled, special, untouchable. Can you feel that dangerous cocktail of divine purpose and human pride? Because Samson felt it too, and it poisoned everything. Picture him in those years before his fall. Every time he won, every time his enemies fell before him, every time he walked away unscathed, he believed it was because of who he was, not who called him. The strength became his. The glory became his. The mission became secondary to his desires, his passions, his choices. Then came Delilah. And I need you to feel this part, because it's where Samson's story becomes yours and mine. He knew. Deep in his spirit, he knew she was the wrong path. He felt that whisper, that warning, that tug in his chest saying, "This is the line you don't cross." But he loved the feeling more than he feared the consequence. He loved being wanted, being pursued, being the center of someone's world. And slowly, question by question, compromise by compromise, he told her everything. Even the secret of his strength, even the one thing that held his calling together. Can you feel that moment, that sickening realization when you've said too much, given too much, crossed the line you swore you'd never cross, and you can't take it back? The razor touches his head while he sleeps. 7 locks fall to the ground, and Samson wakes up thinking he's still strong, thinking he can shake off his enemies like he always has. But the text says something that breaks me every time. He did not know that the Lord had left him. Let that sink in. He didn't know. He had become so comfortable in his compromise, so accustomed to operating in his own strength while calling it God's strength, that he couldn't even feel the moment when the power left. And suddenly he's helpless, vulnerable, just a man. The Philistine sees him, these enemies he once mocked and destroyed, and now he can't fight back. But here's where it gets dark. Here's where we need to sit in this moment, because it mirrors something so many of us feel. They don't just capture him. They gouge out his eyes. They take his sight. They take his dignity. They bind him with bronze shackles and drag him to Gaza to grind grain like an animal. Close your eyes and feel this with me. The strongest man alive reduced to darkness, stumbling, shackled, grinding grain in circles, day after day while his enemies mock him, while his people whisper about his fall, while he replays every choice, every moment, every whisper he ignored. And here's what haunts me about this part of Samson's story. The text says his hair began to grow back, but nobody noticed. Not his captors. Not his people. Maybe not even Samson himself at first, because when you're in that prison, when you're living in the consequences of your worst decisions, you stop believing in second chances. You stop watching for signs of grace. You just grind. You just survive. You accept that this is who you are now. This is what you deserve. This is your final chapter. But let's pause right here. In the darkness of that prison, because something is happening that changes everything about how we understand redemption. While Samson grinds in shame, while he wrestles with regret, while he probably rehearses every choice that led him here, his hair is growing back. Not because he earned it, not because he proved himself, not because he completed some redemption arc or spiritual rehabilitation program. It just grew. Because that's what hair does. Because some things about God's calling aren't dependent on your performance. Some things about your purpose don't die just because you failed. Notice what the text doesn't say. It doesn't say Samson had some dramatic conversion experience in prison. It doesn't say he fasted for 40 days or made some profound spiritual declaration. It just says his hair grew back, the sign of his covenant with God, the mark of his calling, returning quietly in the darkness while he ground grain in shame. What if your purpose is still alive even in your prison season? What if the calling on your life doesn't evaporate just because you made devastating choices? What if God is working on your comeback in the very darkness where you thought everything died? Then comes the day that changes everything. The Philistines are celebrating. 3,000 of them gathered in the temple of Dagon, their god. And they want entertainment. They want to mock the man who once terrified them. "Bring out Samson," they shout. "Let him perform for us. Let the fallen champion amuse us in his blindness." And here's the moment I need you to feel. A young boy leads Samson by the hand into the temple. This mighty warrior, now dependent on a child to navigate the world he can't see. And Samson asks the boy to place his hands on the pillars that support the temple, just to lean on them, just to rest. But something is different. Samson is different. Because in that moment, in that temple full of the enemies who destroyed him, surrounded by the consequences of every wrong choice, Samson prays. And listen to this prayer, because it's not what you'd expect from a final redemption moment. "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please God, strengthen me just once more." Just once more. Do you hear the humility there? Do you feel the shift? This isn't the Samson who thought the strength was his. This isn't the man who believed he was entitled to God's power. This is a broken man who understands now, finally understands, that every ounce of strength he ever had was borrowed, was grace, was divine mercy operating through cracked human vessels. "Let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes," he prays. But notice, he's not asking for a new life. He's not negotiating for freedom, for sight, for restoration of everything he lost. He's asking for one final moment to complete what he was always supposed to do, to strike a blow against the enemies of God's people. And God answers, one last time. Samson pushes against the pillars, and feel this moment, the surge of familiar strength flooding through broken arms, the return of power to a man who lost everything. The temple shakes, the structure groans, and Samson says words that should echo in every season of failure and regret. "Let me die with the Philistines." The temple collapses. 3,000 Philistines fall, and the text says something profound. Those he killed at his death were more than those he killed during his life. His final act, his broken, humble, surrendered final act, accomplished more than all his prideful victories combined. Here's what Samson's story is screaming at anyone who believes their failure disqualified them from purpose. Your worst chapter doesn't have to be your final chapter. The enemy wants you to believe that the prison is the end of the story, that the consequences are the conclusion, that your purpose died when you fell. But what if you're in the grinding season specifically so your hair can grow back? What if this darkness is where humility replaces entitlement? Where brokenness becomes the foundation for a final act that actually fulfills your calling? Because here's the truth that transformed how I see my own broken seasons. Samson didn't need his sight back to complete his purpose. He didn't need his freedom, his reputation, his former glory. He just needed to remember that the strength was never his to begin with. And in that moment of clarity, in that place of absolute dependence, God gave him one more opportunity to be who he was always meant to be. Your failure isn't the end. It might just be the prerequisite for the kind of humility that makes your final act count. It's never too late for God to use your life. Not when you're blind, not when you're bound, not when you're grinding in shame, wondering if anyone even remembers your name. Because God specializes in writing redemption into final chapters, in turning prisons into preparation, in using broken people who finally understand that the power was always His. So if you're in your grinding season right now, if you're living with the consequences of choices you can't undo, let your hair grow back. Let humility replace pride. Let dependence replace self-sufficiency. And when the moment comes, when God asks if you're ready for one more assignment, one more opportunity, one final act, say yes. Because your most powerful moment might not be when you're at your strongest. It might be when you're at your most broken, finally surrendered enough to let God's strength be made perfect in your weakness. Your story isn't over. Your final act is still unwritten. And it's never ever too late for God to turn your greatest failure into your most significant victory.